G'day everyone, and welcome to my first video in this Kreg Australia Summer Series. We're starting off nice and easy today with a bathroom caddy to store a few random bits and bobs that have just been floating around our bathroom laundry. We're going to be using as few tools as possible. It is of course going to be based on Kreg pocket holes. You can use whichever jig you happen to have handy. I'm going to be using only a square cut, a circular saw, and of course a drill to get this done, along with your regular workshop consumables. We'll start by milling up my bed slat timber. You could of course buy some dimensional timber from your hardware store, but if you've got recycled stuff on hand, and as this is going to be painted, it's a nice, cheap, or free choice. Now if you've bought timber, you can of course get it in two separate thicknesses. If you are recycling like me, then put yourself a straight edge guide on the side of your circular saw and measure it out to 1/3 or 2/3 of the width of your bed slats. We effectively want that ratio. The exact width doesn't matter. I think mine are 68 millimeters to begin with. Here is a super simple little jig. It's literally just a few bits of MDF screwed down nice and square, which I can then place my bed slats on to run the edge guide of the circular saw. Very nice solution for ripping if you have a limited workshop. Naturally, if you have a miter saw and a table saw, this project would be even easier, but I'm purposely ignoring some of my larger tools to show you how this can be done in a limited type fashion. So my 4 bed slats are going to get ripped down in this manner. The wider pieces will be the legs and the rails, the skinnier pieces will be some of the bracing. Clamping together 2 bits of wood and then taking the end off using the square cut gives you a nice reference point to then measure out. These are the legs, the height that you want. The measurements in here, for which there will be free plans linked below, are arbitrary. You can size it up to whatever space you have. I think mine's about 60 centimeters high. And now by having them both clamped together, we can again pull out the square cut and very carefully chopping across, these 2 legs will be exactly the same height. Same goes for the rails, which will separate the 2 legs. To stop this from falling over, we're going to have a triangular type frame, but the square cut is not fantastic, and neither is a circular saw for smaller pieces of wood. So to get my rough dimensions at least, I'm just using a handsaw to chop these down to about 2 centimeters longer than what I actually want them. These will form the feet sticking out the front to balance out the weight of my bathroom caddy. However, if you are careful, you can use bracing blocks like I'm doing here to give yourself the support where you need the square cut to be held down nice and steady. Again, dock off the ends of both pieces simultaneously and then tap them in gently, line them up, and these 2 pieces will also be exactly the same length as well. You can get away with basic tools if you just have a quick think about a few things. This is how it's going to go together. Got the legs on the outside, my 2 rails giving most of the structure to the frame, and then the 2 little feet which will stick out the front to provide the balance. These will all be attached with pocket holes. Now this is the K5 Kreg jig, but you don't need to have this big beast. You can have the little R3, which costs next to nothing and get you started in this hobby if you're unsure. If you really want to go into this pocket hole caper, then I love the K5. I'll link up my video of the differences between it and the K4 and why this is probably my recommended system if your budget will stretch. This clamping mechanism is one of the reasons why I like the K5 so much. Once you set everything up to the correct depth, we're using 19mm or 3/4 inch timber here today. It's a very quick process of drilling the holes, which will do the majority of our joinery. Always a good idea to keep the plans on hand. I store them on my phone these days, so you can go back and check when things need to be done differently. In this case, the little sticky out leg bits are 22 millimeters, so I had to quickly reset the jig for that correct depth. Now we're just marking out, again, the arbitrary spacing for the rails This is a specialty Kreg clamp. You don't necessarily need it, though it does pay for itself very quickly. It makes life very easy when you're driving in the first screw, and then you just take the clamp out, and as it's already held in nice and tight, the second screw will be perfect. Making face frames with pocket holes like this just really is super easy, and great for a beginner who's just learning the craft. When things don't need to bear a huge amount of weight, I mean the pocket holes are pretty strong, it's my go-to choice of joinery. Checking square, whacking the screws in the other side, and then we'll repeat for the lower rail as well. Everything ends up pretty nice and square and flush, although my wood is not exactly what you'd call flat. You can see that little bend there. Doesn't bother me. We might be able to brace that out later on. There's our main frame. These ones are a little bit harder to get square when you're using the smaller style stock, but a single pocket hole in the back allows us to attach those two legs. It isn't going to stand up just yet, because we need to get the front brace in to give it the weight and the balance. The Kreg Multi-Mark is another nice little layout tool, and now we can start to do the tricky bit, the diagonal braces.
Alright, a little bit of mathematics, but I promise not too much. Now there are planned degrees, and you could use a protractor and hope for the best, but particularly with reclaimed wood, this isn't going to be straight or exactly square. So we're going to use real world measurements, which is why I haven't cut down the long braces just yet. I've just marked out, as you saw, my 5 centimeters, arbitrary amount, just what I thought would look good on SketchUp. And I'm going to line up this to that mark, so they're flush. And then of course this one lines up to this bottom corner. Grab your pencil, hold that down nice and steady, quick double check. And then holding your pencil or your marking knife, if you have one, as straight as possible, run a line across under there and we'll know where to cut.
Would you believe in my plans it was 73 degrees?
I'll take that.
This might be called a square cut, but that doesn't mean you can't use it for angles. It takes a little bit of brain work and fiddling around with a clamp, but once you've got a bit of practice in, then setting up these sorts of cuts might not be as accurate as a miter saw, but if you don't have one, tell you what, she works pretty well. Again, we're going to use those real world measurements, clamping in at the bottom, and see that little extender bar? That's really helping me line it up on the outside, because this cut is going to be the trickiest one of the whole build. 17 degrees. Now that would be impossible pretty much on a miter saw anyway. So square cut's really going to show its versatility here. I've clamped both of those diagonal braces together, again using my square to line up to my real world mark. And then the camera stopped working.
Here is the setup, clamped down well, and here is a dramatic reenactment.
I quickly cut to the correct length the front brace, so it's just going to separate those 2 feet we've already attached. Nothing difficult here. Except for perhaps clamping it in position. Now I was lucky enough to have this lovely long pipe clamp. You may have to be slightly more creative, as holding this joint together square is a bit tricky. Blame the designer. But once they're in, we've finally got a caddy which will stand of its own accord. We've got that tiny 73 degree angle on this piece, and honestly, it doesn't matter. You can still use your jig to pull this joint nice and tight, drill away at 22 mils as normal. I haven't used glue up until this point, but these long miters are not the strongest joints and they are providing the structural support. So a little bit of tight bond on each end. And this is why you keep your offcuts, because it's the perfect angle for clamping in this difficult glue up joint nice and tight. Look at that squeeze out. Marking into the center of my 19mm stock, and you don't have to use pocket holes everywhere. Here, it was much easier, and it's the back, no one's going to see it, to whack some screws into that long 17-degree joint. You just may want to do a better job of me of measuring the length of your screws, because even though I used a shorter one up top, it still managed to poke out a tiny bit at the front, and we had to file that down. Lucky this is going to be painted. No one's going to see that pocket hole as we finish the construction and test fit in the bathroom. That wood wouldn't look terribly great though, and it's going to be on a wet surface some of the time, so I wanted to put some little rubber feet. Diving into my kit, I found these 10mm rubber doohickeys, and switching the multi-mark to 45-degree mode, I could find the center of the bottom of each of my corners, drill out the hole with a 10mm bit, and my little rubber feet would stick in there without any glue or anything. Now you can use a power sander, and I did just to clean up a few of the little boo-boos and misalignments, but honestly you don't need one, and I did the majority of the sanding with a sanding block and a good piece of sandpaper, because you know I haven't done enough sanding recently. This really doesn't take very long, just got rid of the sharp edges, grabbed my weird mesh screen, which was an inspiration for this project to begin with, and fortunately it fit in there nice and snug. That's what we're pretty much going to end up with. Again, wet area, so I did make sure that I undercoated and then did 2 or 3 coats of a gloss trim paint. The whole idea here is it's minimalistic and it will blend into the background. Back upstairs, plug in our feet, and then I had these old 1980s style picture hooks, but they were going to work really nicely, so we just taparooed those in. Any hooks would do. Give them a quick coat of white, so again they don't look ugly, and we're just about done. If you are a Kreg fan like me, then you'll probably find quite a lot of interesting content on my channel, and if you'd like to subscribe and join me each week, that would be awesome. And here is how the final project will go together. That PowerPoint was obviously one of the key indicators of design here, and the $2 shop rating yielded these lovely plastic baskets, which are going to hold all the bric-a-brac that was otherwise just sitting on the bench, like the hairdryer. Well, that's it. A nice easy one to begin with. We're going to get more complicated as we move through into January's project. Merry Christmas everyone, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Have a good break.